rău. If you can say 2 words so we can test your levels.
Sure. Check, check.
It's okay. It's okay. Începem? Super. Sună la ingest să fie... Ok, mersi. Perfect. Ok, începem. What you're seeing here today in Romania isn't only happening in Romania. The question, what happens when a state regulator shuts down a critical television channel, is being asked right now across the democratic world, and nowhere more fiercely than in the United States of America. My guest today is one of America's most formidable trial lawyers, Robert Barnes, founder of Barnes Law, a name known for high-stakes battles over free speech and constitutional rights. He has defended people the establishment tried to silence, and the way legal and regulatory machinery gets turned into a weapon against political opponents, what's now called lawfare, is something he's been warning about for years, long before it became front-page news. One detail tells you everything about how he reads politics. In 2016, when the entire press had bet on Donald Trump losing, Barnes bet the other way. And he won. I've asked him to take a look at Realitatea Plus case and the parallel with what happened in the United States of America. Robert Barnes, thank you very much for being together with us today.
Glad to be here.
Robert, you've spent your career fighting what you called the weaponization of legal and regulatory machinery against political targets. I want to put a case in front of you that's been happening right now in our NATO and EU member state. Romania's state broadcast regulator revoked our license, and the court has already overturned that. As a lawyer who's seen this playbook in America, what's your first read when a state regulator pulls a critical channel's license?
Well, it's deeply problematic. I mean, it's why in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, we established of any functioning democratic state, and the inability and incapacity of the government to be able to recognize the important and necessary role of dissident press is a sign of a state that is out of control. That once they start resorting to censorship as a remedy, using licensure control to be able to achieve or attain that, then any form of functioning democracy is at risk.
Here's what's legally unusual. After the regulator suspended us, the Bucharest Court of Appeal annulled that decision. Twice, we've been vindicated in court. In your experience, when courts repeatedly overruled a regulator, what does that tell you about whether the original action was about law or about politics?
Well, everything about the case screams that it was about politics rather than the law, but that is best evidenced and manifested by the fact of abusing their power and misusing their power in order to be able to restrain and restrict dissident speech it doesn't want the public to hear, when the role of a regulator is simply to make sure that certain technical aspects are present, not to govern the content, the substantive message of any press. But the fact that they're weaponizing their licensure tools and capabilities to try to suppress dissident press is no more evident than the fact that the court has repeatedly scolded them and reversed their decisions in your case and in the case of your station. And that is evidence that indeed that you have a regulator in Romania that is out of control.
So we've now taken a step that even our own lawyers call unusual. We're suing individual regulators in their personal capacity and asking the court to freeze their personal assets. From an American litigator's view, is going after regulators personally a legitimate accountability tool, or is it as aggressive as critics say?
I think it's often a necessary. So it may be aggressive, but aggressivity is often necessary in defense of freedom, particularly freedom of press, freedom of speech, and to be able to have the constitutional republic of any kind, a democratic government of any kind, be held accountable be able to work requires a functioning, active, free press and holding individuals accountable for their individual actions, where they can't hide behind government immunity for what they have done, I think is an essential and necessary step to deter and discourage this kind of speech suppression and press censorship that will otherwise continue.
You've said the same playbook used against President Trump before he returned to power, selective enforcement, regulatory pressure, lawfare, is a recognizable pattern. Walk our audience through that pattern, because once you describe it, I think Romanians will recognize it instantly.
What's happened is we basically, in various democracies around the world, created systems that were there to make sure, take licensure, for example. It's there in order to function, to serve a particular purpose, to make sure certain technicalities are met. It is not supposed to be utilized as a substantive mechanism of controlling the message itself. But in the case, for example, of what happened to President Trump, happened to my friend, now Health Secretary Robert Kennedy, happened to our recent Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and others, as the system takes whatever tools it has, whatever regulatory powers it has, and it weaponizes them for a politicized purpose. And you see deviations between when they've done it to others, where they've taken the same tools, and when there isn't a political motivation, they take very different course of action than they do when you can see the political motivation present. You can see that in the disparate use of the tools they had available. I mean, is it a coincidence that they target and use these tools against those they consider critics or dissidents? It's the substance of the speech that tells you what it is and why it is they're using those particular tools against those individuals or institutions. And in President Trump's case, first ever president to ever be indicted 4 different times, but indicted on the kind of claims that anyone could have been indicted for. Often these were manufactured cases, where Robert Kennedy targeted with his Instagram account, other social media accounts, so that they could smear and censor him at the same time in the press, in ways that had not been done to similarly situated people. So what it is you look at similarly situated individuals or institutions, and have they suffered the same regulatory consequence or adverse legal consequence that others have. And when you see that similarly situated people have not suffered what you have suffered, what Donald Trump suffered, what Robert Kennedy suffered, what others in the United States suffered, then it is a clear filter by which you can decipher whether or not this is a sincere regulatory objective or a politically motivated misuse and abuse of power. And there's strong and clear parallels between what happened in Romania and what happened in the United States.
Is what's happening to Realitatea Plus the European version of what you watched happen to the United States of America? Where's the line between a regulator doing its job and actually a government silencing a critic?
What you should be able to see is that there's no difference in the way the regulator uses their power versus when applying it to those individuals or institutions align ideologically, give away that the motivation for the use of the tool is in fact not the regulatory power propriety, but rather is instead the substance of the speech, the substance of the content of the press. Another way to filter it through is just how common the behavior is. I mean, if it's one case, if there's a lot of, say, every station in Romania or 90% of the stations in Romania were going through the same thing as you, then you just have a regulatory circumstance of conflict. You don't have speech-driven, content-driven messages. Like here in the United States, we determine whether something's discriminatory from a press or speech censorship perspective by whether or not the content of the speech being presented is what distinguishes the target from other targets and or similarly situated individuals or institutions who are not suffering such regulatory actions. And that was the giveaway in the case against President Trump. That was the giveaway in the censorship of Robert Kennedy. That was the giveaway in a lot of the lawfare. They were applying different standards to different people based on the substance of their speech. And there's clear parallels between what happened in Romania and what happened in the U.S. under our lawfare experience under the Biden administration.
So our parent company now operates as a U.S. entity, PHG Media Invest LLC. Does that change the legal picture? Does a Romanian broadcaster with an American corporate footprint have recourse that a purely domestic outlet wouldn't?
Potentially, yes, because an American company would be subject to the protection of American law under certain circumstances. And that basically just expands your opportunities. It also gives leverage politically and diplomatically to the State Department under the Trump administration to take action on behalf of a U.S. company whose subsidiary is being censored in a European EU nation. This is what Vice President Vance warned about at the very beginning of the President Trump's term in his speech to Europe and in Europe, where he said, you've got to return to values that we in America recognize as global democratic values. What we can't have is continued censorship. What we can't have is continued suppression of the press. What we can't have is continued lawfare to do things like happened in Romania, exclude people from the ballot in ways that people around the world look at and say that's not a functioning democracy. And suspending licenses of independent press is a guaranteed indicator of a lack of respect for the kind of values that America shares with Europe. And the more Romanian and other European and other nations go that path, the more they create distance from the U.S. And that gives the U.S. the capability diplomatically and through other mechanisms and means, given that it's a U.S. company that is involved now in the process, to leverage that to help restore functioning freedom of press in Europe.
If you were our counsel, if this case landed on your desk in America, what's the one move you'd make that we haven't made yet?
I would consider approaching the state, especially if it continues to be a problem or an issue or a risk, to leverage the State Department or the State Department to leverage its diplomatic power with Romania and the European Union to stop this kind of nonsense. Because it is not in Romania's interest that this happen. It's not in Europe's interest that this happen. It's not in America's interest that this happen. We need to have a shared value system that's systematically enforced. And when it's violated anywhere, it is undermined everywhere. This was the point of Dr. Martin Luther King many years ago, our great American civil rights leader, who helped restore our own American constitutional democracy back to its roots, away from its the way in which it had divorced or separated from it during the pre-civil rights era. So that's why I think it's important for that to occur, because otherwise we're all at risk. If there's no freedom of press in any place, then there ends up being no functioning freedom of press every place.
You famously bet on Donald Trump when everyone said he'd lose. So I'll ask you to bet again. Does Realitatea Plus win this fight? And what does winning look like?
I think winning is these regulatory agencies in Romania and Europe stopping doing this to anybody else in the future, recognizing that there are limits to their power, that the purpose of their power is not to govern speech. The purpose of their power is not to censor dissidents. The purpose of their power is to promote the freedom of press, not to undermine the freedom of press. And that is what a win would look like. And I'm confident that that win can occur because I believe there's enough people in Romania, in Europe, in the West, that want to preserve these critical, essential Enlightenment values that distinguish us from every other historical civilization. And I think that betting on freedom usually is a good bet long term.
What would you say directly to the regulators who pulled our license away, knowing a U.S. audience is now watching?
Retire and choose a different profession.
Thank you so much. Robert Bonds was here with us today. Thank you so much for your time. It was a real honor.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We will air it tonight in prime time. I will send you the links and also the TV capture. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.